The humidity hung over Magnolia's family restaurant like a wet blanket, the kind of Louisiana summer heat that made the air conditioning work overtime and still lose the fight. Ceiling fans turned lazy circles above the dining room, pushing around air that felt like breathing through a dish rag. Outside, the parking lot shimmered, and the state highway beyond it wavered like a mirage. Celine Thibodeau had worked the lunch shift at Magnolia's for 4 years, long enough to know every crack in the linoleum and every squeak in the kitchen door. She knew which tables wobbled, which booths had springs that had given up, which regulars wanted their sweet tea with extra ice, and which ones would send it back if there was too much. She knew the rhythms of the place the way she knew her own heartbeat, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the fryer, the bell that dinged when an order was up. She also knew that things had changed in the 6 months since Rick Fontenot took over as manager. Mamie Broussard had run Magnolia's for 43 years, built it from a roadside shack into something that mattered to this town. She'd hired Celine when nobody else would, a 24-year-old single mother with a special needs son and a resume full of gaps. Mamie hadn't asked questions. She'd just handed Celine an apron and said, "You show up, you work hard, you treat people right. Everything else takes care of itself." Then Mamie had gotten sick. Something with her heart, the doctors said, something that required surgeries and recovery time and stepping back from the business she'd built. She'd brought in Rick to manage things while she recovered. Her late husband's nephew, a man with a business degree and ideas about modernization and profit margins and repositioning the brand. 6 months later, half the staff had quit or been fired. The menu had changed. The prices had gone up. And the little touches that had made Magnolia's feel like home, the handwritten specials on the chalkboard, the free biscuits for kids, the coffee that was always on for anyone who needed it, had disappeared one by one, replaced by efficiency metrics and customer throughput, and a laminated list of rules posted in the break room. Celine had stayed. She'd stayed because she needed the job, because her son Lucas needed his therapies and his routines, and the stability that came from knowing where the next rent check was coming from. Lucas was 7 now, bright and funny and obsessed with dinosaurs, and he didn't understand why the world didn't work the way he expected it to. He didn't understand why some sounds hurt, and some textures felt like fire, and some days were harder than others, for reasons nobody could explain. What he understood was that Mama came home every night, and Mama made dinner, and Mama read him stories about T-Rexes and Triceratops until he fell asleep. That was enough. That had to be enough. The lunch rush hit at 11:30, the way it always did, truckers and construction workers and the occasional family passing through on their way to somewhere else. Celine moved between tables with the efficiency of long practice, balancing plates and refilling drinks, and smiling at people who didn't always smile back. She didn't notice the motorcycle pull into the lot. She didn't hear the engine cut off, or the boots on the gravel, or the bell above the door chiming. She was too busy trying to keep Table 6's order straight and Table 9's kids from throwing sugar packets at each other. But she noticed when the dining room went quiet. The man who'd walked in was big, not tall, but solid, built like someone who'd spent his life doing physical work. He had a gray beard, weathered skin, and eyes the color of bayou water. His leather vest was covered in patches. Bayou Brotherhood MC, the biggest one read, with a gator skull grinning beneath the letters. He stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior, and then he walked to the counter and sat down on one of the stools like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. Magnolia's had been serving bikers since before Celine was born. Mamie used to say they were some of her best customers. Polite, tipped well, never caused trouble unless someone else started it first. But that was before Rick. "What can I get you?" Celine asked, pulling out her pad. The man looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "Just coffee, Cher. Black, if you got it. We always got coffee." She poured him a cup, and he wrapped his hands around it the way people did when they needed something to hold on to. Up close, she could see the tiredness in his face, the weight of something he was carrying. She recognized that look. She saw it in the mirror every morning. "Long ride?" she asked. "Long enough." He took a sip, closed his eyes, let out a breath. "Good coffee. Better than what they got at the truck stop down the road. Mamie's recipe. We still use it, even though—" She stopped herself. "Even though things have changed. I heard about Mamie. She doing okay?" "I don't know. Rick doesn't tell us much. Says she's recovering, but Celine shrugged. We haven't seen her in months. The man nodded slowly, like he was filing the information away. I'm Gator. Used to stop here back in the day, when my wife was alive. She loved Mamie's biscuits. Said they tasted like her grandmother's. We don't do the biscuits anymore. Rick says they weren't cost-effective. Something flickered across Gator's face. Not anger exactly, but something close to grief. That's a shame. That's a real shame. The kitchen door swung open, and Rick Fontenot walked into the dining room. He was younger than Gator, softer, with the kind of polo shirt and khakis that said management, louder than any name tag. His eyes swept the room, landed on Gator, and narrowed. Celine, a word. She followed him to the hallway by the restrooms, her stomach already sinking. What did I tell you about serving those people? Rick's voice was low, tight with controlled anger. He's a customer, Rick. He just wanted coffee. He's a gang member. Look at that vest. You know what those patches mean? Those people are criminals, Celine. Drug dealers, thieves, God knows what else. They're bad for business. He's an old man drinking coffee. He knew Mamie. Mamie's not here anymore. I am. And I'm telling you, we don't serve bikers. Not anymore. It's part of the rebrand. Family-friendly. Wholesome. You can't have wholesome with a bunch of thugs sitting at the counter scaring off the real customers. Celine felt something hot rise in her chest, something she'd pushed down 100 times before. Rick, he's not scaring anyone. He's just... I don't care what he's just. Get rid of him or I will. She should have argued. She should have stood her ground, told Rick that Mamie would never have turned away a paying customer, that the man at the counter was a human being who deserved a cup of coffee and a little bit of dignity. But she thought about Lucas, about the rent, about the therapy appointments and the grocery bills and the 100 small expenses that added up to a life she could barely afford. Okay, she said. Okay, I'll handle it. She walked back to the counter, and Gator looked up at her with those bayou water eyes. He'd heard everything. She could tell from his face that he'd heard every word. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize, Chair. Gator pulled out his wallet, left a 20 on the counter for a $2 cup of coffee. You got nothing to apologize for. I know how it is. He stood, straightened his vest, and gave her a small nod. You take care of yourself, you hear? And that boy of yours, Lucas, right? I saw his picture on your phone when you checked it earlier. He looks like a good kid. Celine's throat tightened. How did you know his name? I didn't, but I got a grandson about that age. He's got the same look, like he's seeing things the rest of us miss. Gator smiled, and there was something sad in it. You tell Lucas that Gator says dinosaurs are the best. T-Rex especially. That's the one, right? She couldn't speak. She just nodded. Gator walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle, and looked back at her one more time. The coffee really was good. Mamie would be proud. Then he was gone, the bell chiming behind him, the rumble of his motorcycle fading into the Louisiana heat. Celine stood at the counter, the $20 bill in her hand, and felt something crack open inside her. Not sadness, not anger. Something older. Something that had been waiting a long time to break. Behind her, Rick's voice cut through the silence. See? That wasn't so hard. Now get back to work. Table 12's been waiting 10 minutes for their check. She turned, slipped the 20 into her apron, and went back to work. But something had changed. Something small and quiet and impossible to name. And 2 days later, everything else would change too. The next morning, Lucas had a meltdown before school. It wasn't anyone's fault. It never was. Not really. The seams on his socks felt wrong. The eggs were touching the toast on his plate. The sunlight through the window was too bright, too sharp, and by the time Celine realized what was happening, he was already on the floor, hands over his ears, screaming like the world was ending. She held him through it. That's what you did. You got down on the floor and you held them, and you waited for the storm to pass, and you didn't take it personally when they hit you, or kicked you, or said things they didn't mean. You just held on. 45 minutes later, he was calm. An hour after that, he was on the bus to school, waving at her through the window like nothing had happened. And Celine stood in her driveway in yesterday's uniform, already late for her shift, and felt the weight of it settle onto her shoulders like something physical. She called the restaurant. Rick answered on the third ring. I'm running late. Lucas had a hard morning. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't bother. The words didn't register at first. What? I said, don't bother. I've been reviewing your file, Celine. You've been late 6 times in the past 3 months. You leave early when your son has issues. And after what happened yesterday with that biker, I served him coffee, Rick. That's what we do here. We serve people. You served someone I explicitly told you not to serve. That's insubordination. He was an old man who knew Mamie. He left a $20 tip for a $2 coffee. How is that bad for business? I don't have to explain my decisions to you. Rick's voice had gone cold, the voice of a man reading from a script he'd rehearsed. You're terminated, effective immediately. Your last paycheck will be mailed. Please return your apron and name tag at your earliest convenience. Rick, please, I need this job. My son should have thought about that before you decided company policy didn't apply to you. The line went dead. Celine stood in her driveway, the phone pressed to her ear, listening to nothing. The Louisiana sun beat down on her shoulders. A mockingbird sang somewhere in the live oaks. The world kept turning, indifferent to the fact that hers had just stopped. She didn't cry. She'd learned a long time ago that crying didn't fix anything. It just made your eyes red and your head hurt, and people look at you like you were broken. Instead, she went inside, changed out of her uniform, and sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. Bills. She wrote them all down, the numbers she usually kept locked in the back of her mind where she didn't have to look at them. Rent, $875, utilities, $180. Lucas's therapy, $400 after insurance. Groceries, $300 if she was careful. Gas, phone, the minimum payment on the credit card she'd used to cover. Last month's shortfall. The numbers added up to more than she'd made at Magnolia's. They'd added up to more than she'd made anywhere, ever. She'd been treading water for years, and now someone had pulled her under. The $20 bill was still in her apron pocket. She took it out, smoothed it flat on the table, and looked at it for a long time. Gator had known. He'd seen something in her face, heard something in her voice, and he'd left her that money because he understood what it was like to need help and not know how to ask for it. A stranger, a biker, a man Rick had called a thug and a criminal. He'd been kinder to her in 5 minutes than Rick had been in 6 months. She folded the 20 carefully and tucked it into her wallet, behind the photo of Lucas she kept there. His school picture from last year, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a plastic dinosaur in each hand. Then she picked up her phone and started looking for jobs. 3 days later, she'd applied to 14 places and heard back from 2. One was a fast food chain 40 minutes away, offering minimum wage and split shifts that would make it impossible to be home when Lucas got off the bus. The other was a cleaning service that wanted her to work nights, which meant finding childcare she couldn't afford for hours she couldn't fill. The numbers didn't work. No matter how she arranged them, the numbers didn't work. She was sitting on her porch that evening, watching the sun sink into the bayou, when her neighbor, Miss Darlene, came shuffling over with a casserole dish and a look of determined kindness. I heard what happened, Darlene said, settling into the other chair without being invited. That Rick Fontenot ought to be ashamed of himself. Mamie would have his hide if she knew what he was doing to her restaurant. You talked to Mamie? Not directly, but my sister's cousin works at the hospital where she had her surgery, and she says Mamie's been asking about the restaurant for weeks. They won't tell her anything. Doctor's orders, something about stress. But she knows something's wrong. She can feel it. Celine took the casserole dish. Chicken and rice, the kind of thing that would feed her and Lucas for 3 days. Thank you, Miss Darlene. You didn't have to. Of course I did. That's what neighbors do. Darlene's eyes were sharp beneath her silver hair. You know, that biker who came in, Gator they call him, his wife used to be in my quilting circle before she passed. Sweetest woman you ever met. And Gator adored her. After she died, he just disappeared for a while, rode off into the sunset, people said. But the Bayou Brotherhood, they took care of him, gave him somewhere to belong. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand something. Darlene leaned forward, her voice dropping. Those boys might look rough, but they've got a code. They take care of their own, and they don't forget when someone does them wrong, or when someone does them right. She stood, brushed off her house dress, and headed back toward her own porch. Miss Darlene, Celine called after her. What are you saying? Darlene just smiled and kept walking. I'm saying that $20 was more than a tip, Cher. It was a message. And those boys have a way of making sure messages get answered. That night, after Lucas was asleep, Celine sat at her kitchen table and stared at the photo of Mamie that still hung on her wall. She'd taken it down from Magnolia's break room before Rick could throw it away. Mamie standing in front of the restaurant on opening day, 43 years ago, young and fierce and full of dreams. She wondered if Mamie knew what was happening, if she was lying in some hospital bed, worrying about the place she'd built, the people she'd hired, the community she'd served for 4 decades. She wondered if Mamie knew that Rick was gutting everything she'd created, one policy at a time. She wondered if there was anything she could do about it. The answer, of course, was no. She was a 28-year-old single mother with no savings, no job, and a son who needed things she couldn't provide. She didn't have power. She didn't have connections. She didn't have anything except a casserole from a neighbor and a $20 bill from a stranger. But as she turned off the lights and headed to bed, something Miss Darlene had said kept turning over in her mind. Those boys have a way of making sure messages get answered. She didn't know what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. But 2 days later, when the rumble of motorcycles filled the parking lot of Magnolia's family restaurant, she would find out. Miles away, in a back office with the blinds drawn, Rick Fontenot sat alone with a spreadsheet and a bottle of bourbon. The numbers on the screen blurred together, but he didn't need to see them clearly. He'd memorized them weeks ago. Revenue down 18%. Customer traffic down 23%. Staff turnover up 40%. Every metric he'd promised to improve, sliding in the wrong direction. His phone buzzed. A text from his wife. Coming home late again? Kids miss you. He didn't answer. On his desk was a photograph of his uncle, Mamie's late husband, the man who'd believed in him when no one else did, the man who'd given him this chance to prove he was more than the screw-up everyone said he was, the man who'd died 2 years ago, leaving behind a widow and a restaurant and a nephew who was supposed to save both. Rick poured another drink and stared at the numbers. He wasn't a bad man. He told himself that every night, looking at the same spreadsheets, making the same calculations, he was just trying to keep the place alive, trying to modernize, to compete, to build something that would survive in a world that didn't have room for handwritten specials and free biscuits and customers who scared away the families. But somewhere in the math, he'd lost the thing that made the math matter, and he didn't know how to find his way back. The bourbon burned his throat. The photograph stared at him with his uncle's kind eyes. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow he'd figure something out. Tomorrow he'd make it right. But tomorrow was already too late. The messages had been sent, and the Bayou Brotherhood was already on its way. The call came at 7 in the morning, while Celine was trying to coax Lucas into eating his breakfast without a repeat of yesterday's disaster. Her phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number with a local area code. Hello? This Celine Thibodeau? A woman's voice, older, with the kind of Cajun accent that sounded like home. Who's asking? My name's Mommy Broussard. I believe you used to work for me. Celine nearly dropped the phone. Mrs. Broussard, I thought you were... They said you weren't supposed to... I'm not supposed to be doing a lot of things, Cher. Doctors want me wrapped in cotton wool like some porcelain doll. Mamie's voice was weaker than Celine remembered, but the steel underneath hadn't changed. But I got a phone call last night from an old friend, man named Gator. He told me some things about my restaurant that I needed to hear. Lucas was watching her from the table, his spoon suspended halfway to his mouth. Celine held up one finger. Give me a minute, and stepped onto the porch. Mrs. Broussard, I don't want to cause any trouble. Rick said... I know what Rick said. I know what Rick's been doing for 6 months while I've been stuck in this bed pretending everything was fine. Mamie's breath rattled in her chest. I gave that boy a chance because he was family, because my husband loved him, because I thought maybe he'd grow into something better than what he was. But there's a difference between making hard choices and losing your soul, and I think Rick crossed that line somewhere along the way. What are you going to do? What I should have done months ago. I'm coming to the restaurant today, and I'd like you to be there when I arrive. Mrs. Broussard, I don't work there anymore. Rick fired me. I know. Mamie's voice softened. That's why I'm asking, not telling. I know you've got your boy to think about, and I know I'm asking you to walk into a situation that might get ugly. But Gator tells me you're the kind of person who does the right thing even when it costs you. And right now, I need people like that standing beside me." Celine looked through the screen door at Lucas, who had gone back to eating his cereal with the careful precision he brought to everything. 7 years old and already carrying more weight than most adults she knew. She'd spent his whole life trying to protect him from a world that didn't understand him, and now here she was, being asked to walk into a fight she hadn't started. "What time?" she heard herself say. 11 o'clock, the lunch rush. I want everyone to see." "I'll be there." She hung up and stood on the porch, watching the morning mist rise off the bayou. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know if it was fear or excitement or something else entirely. Some part of her that had been asleep for years, finally waking up. Miss Darlene's words echoed in her mind. Those boys have a way of making sure messages get answered. The message, it seemed, had reached exactly the right person. By 10:30, the parking lot of Magnolia's family restaurant was already filling up, not with the usual lunch crowd, with motorcycles. They came in ones and twos at first, then in larger groups, riders in leather vests with patches that matched the one Gator had worn. Bayou, Brotherhood MC. They parked their bikes in neat rows along the edge of the lot and gathered near the entrance, talking quietly among themselves, nodding at the few regular customers who pulled in and then quickly pulled back out again. Celine arrived at 11:15, Lucas's hand in hers. She'd thought about leaving him with Miss Darlene, but something had stopped her. Maybe the knowledge that this moment was important, that he should see what it looked like when people stood up for what was right. Or maybe just the practical reality that she couldn't afford a babysitter and didn't want to ask for another favor she couldn't repay. "Mama, why are there so many motorcycles?" "Because some people are coming to help a friend." "Are they the good guys or the bad guys?" She looked at the men and women gathering in the parking lot, rough hands, weathered faces, the kind of people most folks crossed the street to avoid, and she thought about Gator, leaving a $20 tip for a $2 coffee, asking about her son like he actually cared. "They're the good guys, baby. They just look different than you'd expect." Gator found her in the crowd. He was wearing the same vest, the same boots, but there was something different in his face today, a sharpness that hadn't been there before, a purpose. "You came," he said. "Mrs. Broussard asked me to." "I know. I'm the one who called her." He knelt down until he was eye level with Lucas. "Hey there, little man. You're the dinosaur expert, right?" Lucas studied him with the careful intensity he brought to everything new. "T-Rex is the best," he said finally, "but velociraptors were actually smarter. Is that right? Well, I'll tell you what. When this is all done, I'll bring you a book about dinosaurs. Got a whole collection at home. My grandson outgrew them, but they're still good. What's your name?" "Gator." "That's a funny name." "It's a nickname, like a secret identity. You got a secret identity?" Lucas thought about it. "Mama calls me her little T-Rex sometimes because I have big feelings." Gator smiled and something in his face softened. "Big feelings are good. Means you're paying attention to the world." He stood up and looked at Celine. "He's a good kid. You're doing right by him." "I'm trying. That's all any of us can do." A murmur went through the crowd, and Celine turned to see a car pulling into the lot. Not a motorcycle, but a silver sedan driven by a woman in scrubs. The passenger door opened and Mamie Broussard stepped out. She looked older than Celine remembered. Frailer. The woman who'd hired her 4 years ago had been sturdy and strong, with hands that could roll biscuit dough and settle arguments with equal efficiency. This woman moved slowly, carefully, like she was carrying something fragile inside her that might break if she jarred it. But her eyes were the same, sharp, bright, seeing everything. The bikers parted to let her through, nodding respectfully as she passed. She stopped in front of the restaurant's entrance and looked up at the sign, Magnolia's Family Restaurant. The letters faded now, the flowers that had once surrounded them painted over in Rick's modernization. "Lord," she said softly, "what has that boy done to my place?" "Mrs. Broussard." Rick's voice came from the doorway. He'd seen them coming. Of course he had. And he stood now with his arms crossed, his face pale, trying to project an authority he clearly didn't feel. "You shouldn't be here. The doctor said a lot of things. They also said I had 6 months, and that was 2 years ago. I'm done listening to people tell me what I can and can't do." Mamie walked toward him, slow but steady. "We need to talk, Rick. about what's been happening here, about what you've done. I've done what I had to do. The restaurant was bleeding money. The old way wasn't working. The old way worked for 43 years. The old way almost bankrupted you, Rick's voice cracked. Do you know what I found when I looked at the books? The real books, not the ones you showed the accountant? You were giving away half your profits. Free coffee, free biscuits, tabs that never got paid. You were running a charity, not a business. I was running a community. Mamie's voice was quiet, but it carried across the parking lot like a bell. I was giving people a place to belong. And yes, sometimes that meant giving away things that cost money. But do you know what I got in return? Loyalty. Love. A town that showed up when my husband died, that brought casseroles and paid their tabs and told their friends about the little restaurant on the highway where the food tasted like home. She gestured at the crowd behind her, the bikers, the neighbors, the former employees who'd started trickling in when word spread. Where's your community, Rick? Where are the people who love this place because of what you've built? Rick didn't answer. His eyes moved over the crowd, and Celine saw something crack in his expression. Not anger, but something closer to despair. I was trying to save it, he said. I was trying to save you. By firing a single mother for giving a man a cup of coffee? Mamie shook her head. That's not saving anything. That's just fear dressed up in a spreadsheet. A police cruiser pulled into the lot. Deputy Martin Arsenault stepped out, his hand resting on his belt, his eyes moving over the crowd of bikers with barely concealed unease. Got a call about a disturbance, he said. Everything okay here, Mrs. Broussard? Everything's fine, Martin. Just having a family discussion. A family discussion with 50 bikers in the parking lot? They're old friends. They came to help. The deputy's eyes found Gator, and something complicated passed between them. Not hostility, but not warmth either. History, Celine thought. There was history there. Gator, the deputy said flatly. Martin, I hope this doesn't turn into something I have to deal with. Just a conversation, deputy, nothing more. The moment stretched thin. Celine felt Lucas's hand tighten in hers, felt the attention of the crowd pressing against her like a physical weight. This was the edge of something. She could feel it. One wrong word, one wrong move, and the whole thing could collapse into something ugly. Then Mamie did something unexpected. She turned to Celine and held out her hand. Come here, Cher. I need you to tell everyone what happened, what Rick did and why. Celine froze. Mrs. Broussard, I don't... You were there. You saw it. And these people need to hear it from someone who doesn't have an agenda. Mamie's eyes were steady on hers. I know I'm asking a lot, but I'm asking anyway. Lucas tugged at her hand. Mama, are you scared? She looked down at her son, her beautiful, complicated, impossible son, and thought about all the times she'd stayed quiet because quiet was safer. All the times she'd swallowed her words because speaking up meant risking something she couldn't afford to lose. Yeah, baby, she said. I'm scared. That's okay. You can still be brave when you're scared. That's what you told me. Something broke open in her chest. She squeezed his hand, let go, and walked forward to stand beside Mamie. My name is Celine Thibodeau, she said, her voice shaking at first and then steadying. I worked here for 4 years, and this is what happened. She told them everything. The conversation with Gator, Rick's orders, the firing, the way it felt to be told that kindness was theft, that hospitality was insubordination, that the thing that made this place special was the thing that had to be destroyed. When she finished, the parking lot was silent. Rick stood in the doorway, his face gray, his hands hanging at his sides. Mamie stood beside her, breathing hard but standing tall. And behind them, 50 bikers and a growing crowd of townspeople waited to see what would happen next. The deputy cleared his throat. Well, that's a lot to take in. Mamie turned to face Rick. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to take back what's mine and try to fix what's been broken. She held out her hand. Give me the keys, Rick. Go home to your wife and your kids. Figure out who you want to be. But you can't do it here anymore. Rick stared at her hand. His jaw worked. For a long moment, Celine thought he was going to fight, going to dig in, going to make this ugly. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring of keys, and placed them in Mamie's palm. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I just wanted to prove I could do it. I just wanted to be worth something. You are worth something, Rick. You just forgot how to show it. Mamie closed her fingers around the keys. Now go. We've got work to do. He walked to his car without looking back. The engine started. The sedan pulled out of the lot and disappeared down the highway, and Celine watched it go with a strange mixture of relief and grief. Mamie turned to face the crowd. Well, she said, her voice carrying across the parking lot, who's hungry? Because I believe we've got a restaurant to reopen, and I'm going to need all the help I can get. The cheer that went up could be heard a mile away, and somewhere in the middle of it, Lucas was laughing, his hands over his ears to block out the noise, but his face split in a grin. Celine picked him up and held him close, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. What happened next would become legend in this part of Louisiana. The day 50 bikers rolled up their sleeves and rebuilt a restaurant in a single afternoon. They didn't just eat, they worked. Within an hour of Mamie unlocking the doors, the Bayou Brotherhood had transformed Magnolia's into a construction site. A man named Tex, who turned out to be a licensed electrician, was up on a ladder fixing the flickering lights that Rick had never gotten around to repairing. Another rider, a woman with silver hair and a patch that said Road Captain, was in the kitchen reorganizing the storage system that Rick had optimized into chaos. Someone had produced paint from somewhere, the original sage green that Mamie had chosen 43 years ago, and a crew was already covering the sterile gray that Rick had insisted was more professional. Lucas sat in a corner booth with a plate of chicken fingers and a coloring book someone had found in the back, watching the activity with wide eyes. Every few minutes, a biker would stop by to show him something, a wrench, a paintbrush, a funny face drawn on a napkin. He didn't talk to most of them, but he didn't hide either. That was something. Celine worked the front of house, falling back into rhythms she'd thought she'd forgotten. She poured coffee, took orders from the bikers who were actually paying customers between repair shifts, and tried not to cry every time someone called her by name or asked how Lucas was doing. Mamie sat in a booth near the kitchen, directing traffic like a general on a battlefield. She was too weak to work. The nurse who'd driven her had made that very clear, but her voice carried and her eyes missed nothing. When a biker tried to throw away the old chalkboard where the daily specials used to be written, she stopped him with a single word. That stays. It's broken, ma'am. The frame's cracked. Then fix the frame. Some things are worth fixing. By 3 o'clock, the lunch rush had turned into something else entirely. Word had spread through town, Miss Darlene's doing, probably, or maybe the mysterious network that connected small communities like invisible thread. People started arriving who weren't bikers, who weren't even regular customers. They came with casserole dishes and cleaning supplies and offers of help. They came because Mamie was back, because something had happened at Magnolia's, because they wanted to be part of whatever was being built. The Thibodeau family showed up around 4. Celine's mother, her 2 aunts, a cousin she hadn't seen in years. They descended on the kitchen like a well-organized army, taking over the cooking while the regular staff, most of whom had drifted back when they heard the news, handled the front. You didn't tell us, her mother said, cornering Celine by the coffee station. You didn't tell us you lost your job. You didn't tell us things were bad. I didn't want you to worry. Cher, that's what family does. We worry about each other, and then we help. Her mother's eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall. You're not alone. You were never alone. You just forgot how to ask. They hugged in the middle of the dinner rush, dishes clattering around them, and Celine let herself be held the way she hadn't since she was a child. Gator found her later, after the sun had set, and the crowd had thinned to a manageable hum. He was carrying a paper bag, which he set on the counter in front of her. For Lucas, he said, told him I'd bring it. Inside was a book, not new but well cared for, the spine creased from years of reading. Dinosaurs. A complete guide, the cover said, with a Tyrannosaurus Rex roaring against a prehistoric sky. This was your grandson's? He's 15 now, more interested in cars and girls than dinosaurs, but this book got him through some hard years. Gator's voice was gruff. Kid like Lucas. He needs things he can count on. Things that don't change. Dinosaurs are good for that. They've been the same for 65 million years. Celine looked at the book, at the worn edges and the faded cover, and understood that she was holding something precious, not just paper and ink, but a piece of someone's history passed on because it mattered. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to—" "Don't thank me. Just make sure he reads it." Gator started to turn away, then paused. "Mamie wants to talk to you. In the back, when you get a minute." Celine found Mamie in the small office that Rick had commandeered as his own. The spreadsheets were gone, the motivational posters pulled down. In their place was a photograph, the same one Celine had taken from the break room, Mamie on opening day, young and fierce and full of dreams. "You kept it," Mamie said, noticing her gaze. "I couldn't let him throw it away. Sit down, Cher. We need to talk about what comes next." Celine sat, her hands clasped in her lap, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. "I can't run this place anymore," Mamie said. The words came out flat, matter of fact, like she'd practiced them. "The doctors have made that clear. Even being here today was more than I should have done. My heart—" She touched her chest, a small gesture that said everything. "It's not going to get better. I have time, but not as much as I'd like. Mrs. Broussard, let me finish." Mamie's eyes were steady. "I built this restaurant because I wanted to create something that would outlast me, a place where people could belong, a community, and for 43 years I thought I was doing that, but I was wrong." She leaned forward. "I wasn't building a restaurant. I was building a family. And families don't belong to one person. They belong to everyone who's part of them." She slid a folder across the desk. Celine opened it with trembling hands. Inside were legal documents, ownership papers, a transfer of assets that Celine couldn't fully understand, but whose meaning was clear from the first page. "I want you to take over," Mamie said, "not as manager, as owner, equal partner with me, and then full owner when I'm gone." "I can't, Mrs. Broussard, I can't afford—" "Did I say anything about money?" Mamie's voice sharpened, then softened. "This isn't a sale, Celine. This is a gift. A thank you for 4 years of showing up when you didn't have to. For giving away coffee when you knew it might cost you your job. For standing up today even though you were scared." Celine stared at the papers. The words blurred together as her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't stop. "I'm a single mother," she said. "I don't have a business degree. I don't know how to run a restaurant. Neither did I when I started. I learned, and so will you." Mamie reached across the desk and took her hand. "You've got something Rick never had, something that can't be taught. You see people as people, not as numbers. You understand that kindness isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes any of this worth doing." She squeezed Celine's hand once, then let go. "Talk to your family. Think about it. But don't say no just because you're scared. Fear is a terrible reason to turn down a gift." Celine walked back to the dining room in a daze. The evening had settled into something quieter. Most of the bikers had gone, leaving behind a restaurant that looked more like itself than it had in months. The chalkboard was back on the wall, waiting for someone to write the daily specials. The old photographs had been rehung. Even the wobble in table 6 had been fixed. Lucas was asleep in the corner booth, the dinosaur book open on his chest, his face peaceful in a way it rarely was during the day. Gator sat. Across from him, nursing a cup of coffee, watching over him like a guardian from a fairy tale. "He crashed about an hour ago," Gator said quietly. "Wore himself out, watching all the excitement." Celine slid into the booth, careful not to wake her son. "Mamie offered me the restaurant." Gator didn't look surprised. "What did you say?" "I didn't say anything. I don't know what to say." "That's okay. Big decisions take time." He looked at Lucas, then back at her. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you've spent your whole life taking care of other people and not letting them take care of you. I think you've been so busy being strong that you forgot it's okay to lean on something besides yourself." He set down his coffee cup. "Mamie's not just giving you a restaurant. She's giving you a community, people who'll show up when things get hard, people who'll stand in a parking lot and wait for you to be ready to speak." He gestured at the room. The photographs, the chalkboard, the sage green walls. This place isn't just walls and tables. It's 43 years of people choosing to be part of something together. And now, it can be yours, if you're brave enough to take it. Celine looked at her sleeping son, at the book on his chest, at the restaurant around her, that had somehow become home without her noticing. She thought about the $20 bill that had started all of this, still in her wallet, behind Lucas's school picture. She thought about kindness as currency, about community as something you built one cup of coffee at a time. "I'm scared," she said. "Good." Gator stood, dropped a 20 on the table, the same amount he'd left that first day, and headed for the door. Brave and stupid look the same from the outside. The difference is that brave people are scared first. The bell chimed as he left. Through the window, Celine watched him mount his motorcycle, kick it to life, and pull out onto the highway. The taillight dwindled into the Louisiana dark, and then he was gone. She sat in the quiet restaurant with her sleeping son and the weight of a decision she hadn't expected to make. The ceiling fans turned their lazy circles, the coffee maker gurgled, and somewhere in the back she could hear Mamie saying goodbye to the last of the volunteers, thanking them for coming, promising that the biscuits would be back on the menu by the end of the week. Celine picked up the $20 bill Gator had left, smoothed it flat on the table, looked at it for a long time. Then she tucked it into her wallet, behind Lucas's picture and behind the first 20, the one that had changed everything. 2 small pieces of paper, 2 acts of kindness, a whole new life waiting to be built. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and made her choice. 8 months later, the humidity still hung over Magnolia's family restaurant like a blessing and a curse. The ceiling fans still turned their lazy circles, pushing around air that felt like breathing through warm honey. The state highway still shimmered outside the windows, and truckers still pulled in looking for coffee and something that tasted like home. But the sign was new, hand-painted by a local artist with magnolia blossoms curling around the letters and a small gator hidden in the corner that only sharp-eyed customers ever noticed. And behind the counter, where Celine had once stood waiting for permission to be kind, she now stood as something else entirely. Owner. The word still felt strange in her mouth, like a language she was learning to speak, but every day it got a little easier. Every day the restaurant felt a little more like hers. The biscuits were back on the menu. Mamie's recipe, taught to Celine in a series of afternoon lessons before Mamie's health had declined too far for her to stand at the stove. They weren't quite as good as Mamie's, not yet, but they were getting closer. And the customers who remembered the old days said they could taste the love in them, which was really all that mattered. Lucas sat in his usual booth by the window, the dinosaur book open in front of him, a plate of biscuits with honey at his elbow. He was reading aloud to a girl about his age, Miss Darlene's granddaughter, who'd started coming by after school when her grandmother was busy. They weren't friends exactly. Lucas didn't make friends the way other kids did, but they were something. 2 children sharing space, sharing silence, sharing the occasional fact about prehistoric creatures. "Did you know," Lucas said, not looking up from his book, "that the T-Rex could bite with 6 tons of force? That's like having a truck drop on your head." "That's gross," the girl said. "It's science." Celine smiled and poured coffee for the man at the counter. A regular now, a retiree named Henry, who came in every morning for eggs and conversation. The morning rush had settled into a comfortable rhythm, familiar faces mixed with travelers passing through, the clatter of dishes and the murmur of voices weaving together into something that sounded like home. The bell above the door chimed and Gator walked in. He came by once a month or so, sometimes with other riders, sometimes alone. He always sat at the counter, always ordered black coffee, and whatever the special was, always left a $20 tip that Celine had stopped trying to argue about. She kept them all now, the 20s, in a jar in her office, a growing collection of small kindnesses that reminded her how all of this had started. "Morning, Cher," he said, settling onto his usual stool. "Morning yourself. Coffee's fresh." "Always is." She poured him a cup, and he wrapped his hands around it the same way he had that first day, like it was precious, like it was the only warm thing in the world. Some things didn't change. "How's Lucas doing?" "Good days and hard days, same as always." She glanced at her son, at the careful way he was pointing out something in the book, to Miss Darlene's granddaughter. "But more good days lately. His therapist says he's making progress." "The new therapy helping?" "I think so. And having a place where people know him, where he doesn't have to explain himself every time." She shrugged. "That helps too." Gator nodded, sipping his coffee. "Heard from Mamie?" Yesterday. She's doing okay as she can be. The hospice nurses say she's comfortable. Celine's voice caught slightly on the word. She asked about the biscuits. I told her they're almost as good as hers. She'll outlive us all just to correct your technique. Probably. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the morning unfold around them. Outside, the sun was climbing over the bayou, painting the parking lot in shades of gold and green. A mockingbird was singing in the live oaks, and down the highway, a line of motorcycles was approaching, distant thunder growing closer. The boys wanted to stop by, Gator said, following her gaze. Hope that's okay. Always okay. You know that. The Bayou Brotherhood had become regulars in the month since the restoration. They came for club meetings sometimes, filling the back room with leather and loud laughter. They came for holidays, bringing toys for Lucas and casseroles for the staff Christmas party. They came whenever they were passing through, because Magnolia's was a place that belonged to them now, the same way it belonged to Celine and Lucas and Miss Darlene and everyone else who'd chosen to be part of something together. The bell chimed again. A woman walked in, professional clothes, tired eyes, a toddler on her hip, and a look on her face that Celine recognized, the look of someone who was barely holding it together, who was running on fumes and prayer and the stubborn refusal to admit she couldn't do it alone. Just coffee, the woman said, her voice thin, and maybe, do you have anything for kids? She hasn't eaten since... She trailed off. The toddler fussed against her shoulder. Celine was already moving, pouring coffee, pulling a biscuit from the warmer, finding the box of crayons they kept behind the counter for moments exactly like this. On the house, she said, sliding everything across the counter. You look like you could use it. The woman stared at her. I can't. I can pay. I know you can pay, but you don't have to. Not today. Celine smiled, and it felt easy, natural, like the most obvious thing in the world. Sit down. Rest. Let someone take care of you for a minute. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She didn't argue. She just took the coffee and the biscuit and the crayons, found a booth in the corner, and let her daughter color on the placemat while she breathed for what looked like the first time in days. Gator was watching with a small smile on his weathered face. What? Celine asked. Nothing. Just thinking about how things come around. He finished his coffee, set a 20 on the counter, and stood. You're good at this, you know, the whole thing. Mamie picked the right person. I'm just doing what she taught me. No. Gator shook his head. You're doing what you already knew. She just gave you the space to remember. He headed for the door as the rest of the club started pulling into the lot, engines rumbling, chrome flashing in the morning sun. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. Same time next month? Same time always. The bell chimed, the door swung shut, and Celine stood behind the counter of the restaurant that was hers now. Hers and Lucas's and Mamie's and everyone else's who'd chosen to belong, and watched the morning unfold the way it had unfolded for 43 years, the way it would unfold for 43 more if she had anything to say about it. The ceiling fans turned, the coffee maker gurgled, and somewhere in the corner booth, Lucas was teaching a little girl about dinosaurs, his voice steady and sure, the way it always was when he talked about the things that mattered. Celine picked up the coffee pot and went back to work. There were customers to serve, biscuits to make, a community to tend, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss one, and tell us in the comments. When did a stranger's kindness change the course of your life?